One of the hallmarks of Bioshock, to me at least, was that it really blended RPG and sort of first-person action game together in a way that, you know, is sort of standard today, but a decade ago was really pretty revolutionary. And I know for the team, I think at some point it became clear that you wanted this to work on consoles, not on PC, right?
Well, both, yeah.
Yeah. But so the idea of, you know, doing a console game and a PC game and doing something that sort of felt like a shooter but had much more depth. And I know in some of the early design docs you talked about sort of creating an FPS plus versus an RPG light. What was the difference in your mind between those two?
I think for us is the big difference between System Shock and Bioshock ended up being that System Shock was more about your character growth and Bioshock was more about the environment. Because with System Shock, we really didn't have System Shock 2. We didn't really have either the art team to make enough assets or the visual power to sort of make a really convincing environment. But as we started working on Bioshock, the art team was so strong that the ability to tell a story within the environment became the most important thing about the game. And that was sort of not something we thought right at the beginning. That was not really a concept we had. But as we started building things, we could realize that the visual world was the star of this thing. The Rapture was really the star of this thing. And telling the story outside of cutscenes, telling it in the world, so the gamer could discover the story rather than us telling him the story, telling him or her the story. And it was still very much for the time, I think for the time, quite different than what you had seen in terms of there wasn't a lot of growth in shooters. So It was still, I think, for the time, very, very revolutionary. But I think System Shock 2 was even more ahead of its time in terms of that growth thing because we defocused a little bit. Primarily, part of it was just figuring out how to do that all on a console controller was very tricky.
No, I remember even the early demos, and people like, you know, you see a plasma, you see like a upgraded weapon, people are like, oh, I've never seen that before in a shooter. And that was, you know, when you were coming out of the sort of, you know, the Quake, Doom, Half-Life, where it's like you have, you know, 8 weapons on the keyboard, and you sort of knew what they were, and they weren't going to change. Yeah. Sean, was that something that, you know, from a sort of creative standpoint, was it always clear that that was something you guys wanted to do, or it evolved over time because you wanted to have more depth in the game?
I mean, it certainly evolved over time, and each, you know, upgrade path was slightly, had its own unique challenges. Like certainly upgrading the weapons, you had to design a base weapon that didn't feel like crap, still felt like something that you wanted to use, but then the ability to add the upgrades to that, and each of the upgrades can come in any order, so you have to be aware that this, you know, parts A, B, and C could come in at any different time to upgrade the weapon. In a first-person shooter, that's your star. That's the thing that you're seeing all the time. When it comes to other things, plasmids, things that are, you know...
Tonics.
Tonics, yes, sorry. It's been a while.
Come on, Sean.
I know, it's 10 years. Those things were more offloaded to machines that you would then have to interact with, so you're not carrying the inventory around with you. But each of these decisions on, you know, how we're going to upgrade the player, you know, it wasn't like a mouse and keyboard, okay, we can just use the mouse and you have all these buttons at your disposal.
You could arbitrarily point at a part of the screen really easily, which you could do in System Shock too.
Yeah, so we certainly, you know, learned trial by fire when we were trying to adapt these things to the console at the time.
Yeah, and like having, you know, different ammo types and stuff like that. Like we went through numerous iterations of the interface to make it. Like we had the first times, you know, we sort of put the interface into play. It was very obtuse and very tricky to get your head around, and we just kept working on it and working on it and working on it because you want to feel like second nature. But that was, we spent a lot of time on that.
What motivated the idea of having so much choice in the way you could sort of play through this game? What was it to, you know, give the player a better sense of authorship over the experience, or what was driving that?
I've always liked the idea of giving the player a lot of agency in terms of their play style and experimenting with the play style and trying different things and seeing what worked and didn't work and interacting with the environment. The notion that it's sort of a playground that you get to play around with and imprint your own desire on was great, because I think we were more skeptical about being able to do that with story at the time. In fact, so much to the point where that became almost like a joke. You know, that becomes the meta joke of the game of how little agency you have in your story. But agency in terms of how you play the experience and how you load out your weapons and how you interact with the environment, as compared to most shooters at the time, where basically like you can shoot them with the shotgun or shoot them with the the pistol. That was really important to us. So we spent a lot of time trying to make the world react in a way that you would expect and hope it to react when you tried something.
Right. And some of those system or decisions we made about systems fed back into the narrative, like locking Adam behind Big Daddy and the little sister. Like, you can't get Adam unless you deal with the Big Daddy, which then becomes a roving boss fight, which then becomes another system that I don't know if we planned that from the start or was one of those happy, like, serendipity, like, oh, this decision that we made about putting Adam behind the Big Daddy totally works because now we have a different type of boss fight that you hadn't really seen in other games.
Actually, it was bad. It was the other way, because what happened was originally there was no concept of Adam, and Big Daddy just had money and other treasure on them, like every other splicer. Yeah. And they were so tough, nobody would ever fight them, because why on earth would you go after that guy?
Right, go off a bunch of small splicers and get the same amount. Yeah.
So we had to come up with a currency that was exclusive to them, because we knew that was where the fun was, right? But we also knew people were terrified of them, and we didn't want to fight them. Yeah. So video game development and system development is a lot like economics, right? In economics, you try to encourage certain behaviors through tax, usually through tax policy. Well, you want business growth, so you lower taxes on certain segments of the business economy, or you want to encourage, people to move into this area, so you make incentives to move in here. We had to make an incentive for players to fight the Big Daddy, and Adam became that incentive. And then once you had this Adam, then you had a new piece of narrative, which they could then incorporate back into the story.
An old tasty Adam I can drink.
Stay away from her, or it is you who will be shot next.
Easy now, Doctor. He's just looking for a wee bit of Adam. Just enough to get by.
I'll not have him hurt my little ones.
Talk a bit about the plasmids and the vending machines and that sort of whole approach to, I guess, what is kind of a tech tree, but, and coming from PC games, used to strategy games and whatnot, with very complicated ways of how you would upgrade things. I thought you guys did a really interesting approach to how you made it very accessible to a console audience. How did that evolve? Did you know the vending machines were going to be there from the get-go?
Well, we had vending machines in System Shock 2, so we were sort of lifting that, and I always thought that was a fun notion because it's a affordance that people already understand. They see a vending machine, they know immediately, oh, that's where I buy stuff, right? Yeah. And you also then have to have a shopkeep. When we talked about wanting to make things, put limitations on ourselves so things felt fully believable. Yeah. If we had a shopkeeper sitting there, you can't shoot him. He sits there, he doesn't say anything. Right. And all of a sudden he feels fake. Where a vending machine, the Circus of Values machine, can feel 100% authentic. Right. Despite the fact that it's selling like ammo and stuff like that, which is,
But in an objectivist society where you don't have rules and regulations on that type of thing, it feeds back into the narrative.
But you don't then break the fiction at all by having these characters who sort of don't really live and breathe in the world. So the vending machines became an important part of that. But we still want to give them character, and hence and so that clown image came from a piece of, that image is actually from like a fruit container or something from like the 1940s. Okay. And so we had a book of like royalty-free images, and I saw that image, and I'm like, let's put that clown on it, and we'll call it Circus of Values. And then, we wrote some lines for it, decided he'd be this sort of asshole clown, and then we hired the best actor in the world to play that part. That was me. My biggest Avengers, I didn't cost anything.
I didn't know you were really.
I was a clown. Yeah, I was a clown.
I hear it in my head every day.
My wife hates that voice. She hates that voice.
You can give us a little of it right here.
Welcome to the Circus of Values. She does not allow me to do that, so I'll do it outside of the house. Okay. But it allowed us to have something that felt very rich and very real, while being very limited at the same time.
Feel your cravings at the Circus of Values.
And also, the plasmids and sort of the motif of sort of the videos and how you explain sort of what a plasmid was, that was a really fun way, I thought, to sort of explain that. Sean, how did you guys evolve that? Because it was a very artistic approach.
I think those came on pretty late too, because we were developing all these systems, and you make the assumptions because you're dealing with them every day that the player who gets this game is going to understand what these systems are. And we always joke that you can't ship a developer with a game, or you can't expect somebody to have a README file for all of these things. Nobody's understanding what these plasmids are or how to use them. How do we present these to the audience in such a way that they're going to understand what it is fictionally and what it is functionally? Because Rob Waters did a lot of the animations on those, and we sit down and we write out like a little 30-second commercial of what this thing is. And again, because going back to the narrative, this is what would happen in Rapture. People are trying to sell these things, so they would come out with commercials to explain why you need this. Using that as your framework, you can then come up with all of these little gags that people will remember, that have a little personality to them. But I think ultimately in the end weren't that expensive to create, because they're cheap.
I think that one of the most important things about it is we didn't want them to be long, and we didn't have a lot of budget for the art, so we have like a couple of frames of animation in them essentially. And so we had to figure out, how do we message how this thing works in like that. And that's what marketing is, right? It's how do you message how something works. And marketing and tutorializing are very similar things, right? You're trying to get a message across in a very brief period of time in a very snappy fashion. And I think that one of the things that I always felt about games is that tutorials are sort of death. And because they're usually like, you go into a scene and there's like a shooting range or something like that, and
narratively they never really make sense either,
and they're so boring. And so we always try to put a big burden on ourselves of how do we train people while not letting them know they're being trained, and brevity is really important to that. So we had a bunch of art constraints on that, which also led to a bunch of writing constraints, and so those things were like, I don't even know if they were 30 seconds.
Yeah,
they were
like
really short. Yeah, like 15 seconds long. We had to explain a whole plasmid in that period of time, and I think that was a good exercise because it also made the game, it forced us to be concise and to really explain what this thing was like that.
Throw objects at foes. You can even catch grenades and throw them back.
So, da sind wir dann auch wieder zurück. Zumindest erstmal ich. Ich mache kurz noch mal eine Trinkpause, weil nach 2 Stunden ist der Hals trocken. Wir hören uns gleich wieder. So, da bin ich dann auch wieder. Ich habe mir kurz nur was zu trinken geholt.
Du hast es geschafft. Von jetzt an sollte es keinen Ärger mehr geben. Wir treffen uns weiter vorn.
Mal schauen. Spiel wird gespeichert. Okay. Flashbacks, okay.
Ich bin direkt vor dem U-Boot-Dock, aber ich komme nicht rein. Ich brauche deine Hilfe. Meine Familie ist keine 100 Meter mehr von Ihnen entfernt.
Da bin ich auch wieder dabei.
Ja. So.
Muss ich mich gerade mal kurz um was kümmern, Leute. Es tut mir leid. Bisschen Pulverversteck. Ach, da ist wieder ein Portwein drin.
Ja. Oh.
Und da liegen Zigaretten drin, ja. Wir wollten Jack ja das Rauchen abgewöhnen.
Ja, ich habe aus Versehen mal...
Jetzt auch kein Elektroschocker. Scheiße, Elektrovolt. Ist ja blöd. Wir hätten wohl doch mal Plasmidslot kaufen sollen. Na, ist jetzt nicht schlimm.
Ja, da wollte ich eigentlich ja hin. Bloß das Spiel sagt.
Ja, das kannst du auch nebenbei machen. Ne? Du kannst ruhig an die Orte hingehen, wenn du da hingehen möchtest. Also, das Spiel wartet. Also, so dass jetzt bis das Ding vorbei ist.
Nein, das Spiel meinte,
Wir sind alle
ich kann
hier
nicht mehr
runtergekommen,
zurück.
weil wir dachten,
Ich wollte doch
wir
durch
werden
die
alle
Tür.
Glieder in Ryans
Ja,
großartige
das hättest du
Kette.
vorher machen müssen,
Aber
bevor du
es hat sich
reingekommen bist.
herausgestellt, dass Ryans Kette aus Gold ist, während unsere Ketten Schlösser haben und dicke Eisenkugeln. Er residiert oben in Fort Frolic und bumst die schärfsten Mädels. Wir sitzen hier unten in diesem Loch und nehmen Fische aus. Fontaine verspricht uns, es wird besser. Tut so, als wäre er einer von uns, verstehst du? Als ob der einen Tag in seinem Leben gearbeitet hätte. Er sagt, wir treffen uns um 11 in der Baracke, wo der Fisch abgepackt wird. Ja. Ich gehe hin und bring noch ein paar Jungs mit. Hey, recht viel schlimmer kann's nicht mehr werden.
Oh doch, Bitchwillen kann das. Ja, das würde ich jetzt nicht trinken, wenn wir aus besoffen fallen.
Ja, aber ich brauche was.
Gesundheit, ich weiß.
Ja.
Oh Gott.
Wir werden ihm, wir gewöhnen
Drück auf den Schalter oben im Überwachungsraum.
Das Rauchen
und lass
ab,
mich
aber
rein.
wir würden ihm jetzt das
Ich finde, es
Trinken
ist an der
an.
Zeit, dass wir uns mal kennenlernen.
Na.
Schön, du hattest deinen Spaß, aber genug ist genug. Wenn du diesen Knopf drückst, wirst du erfahren, was es heißt, mein Feind zu sein.
Ah, du hast Kaffee getrunken. Man kann leider nicht nur eine Sache mitnehmen, deswegen muss man dann...
Also, wenn du so deine Gebäude baust, dass man eine Jump-and-Run-Einlage, also Einbruch,
Ja, das...
Einbruch sicher ist dann wirklich.
Könnte dein Spaß haben, ja. Kannst du die Run-Passage so machen, wie du möchtest, das stimmt. Wenn du jetzt da runter guckst, dann sieht man gleich Atlas.
Durchgebrannt? Ich kann hier drin überhaupt nichts sehen.
Da ist
Gib mir einen
Atlas.
Moment und
Genau
ich hol dich
da.
da
Ja.
raus. Moira, kannst du mich hören, Liebling?
Das ist Atlas.
Es ist so dunkel hier drin. Wenn dein Freund nur nach oben schauen und dich sehen würde, vielleicht könntest du ihn warnen. Oder wenigstens irgendetwas tun. Außer nur tatenlos zuzusehen.
Leiter! Sie sind überall. Ich kann sie nicht aufhalten. Muss mich zurückziehen. Hol meine Familie daraus. Wir treffen uns dann so schnell wie möglich wieder.
Vorsicht. Mal gespannt. Weg mit den Spleißern! Durch die Organe hast du wieder einen Landskast bekommen, genau. Ja, die Hauptmuni ist geil gegen auf den Spleißer ganz gut durch. Vorsicht! Wenn man so Kacken reißt und sagt, ja, wir kommen damit durch, das ist super. Ja, Drachenmeister ist ja damit ja eine andere Situation aus dem Spiel von mir, aber gut. Das was anderes gerade.
So, und da.
Ach so, Leute, ihr könnt ja mal in den Stream schreiben, aber nur für mich, ob ihr auf meinem Kanal mal Metroid sehen wollt. Super Metroid übrigens. Dann zocke ich das auch gerne davor mit euch zusammen. Oder schreibt was dann in die Kommentare.
Falls ihr das auf YouTube sehen wollt. Ich versuche, wenn ich es nicht...
Was ist passiert? Hau ab, wenn du kannst! Raus da! Wir treffen uns woanders wieder!
Wenn ihr das auf meinem Kanal sehen wollt, mein Kanal ist Concilia, dann könnt ihr euch gerne mal Sachmeister Kommentar schreiben. Dann weiß ich Bescheid, ihr wollt das sehen, das interessiert euch, dann werden wir das verstanden, das Plane, weil das ist einfach so, das Plane, das ist richtig ganz gut eingerichtet. Und dann,
wenn ich nicht vergesse, verlinke ich das auf jeden Fall bei YouTube.
Genau. Und dann könnt ihr euch aber aussuchen, ob ihr das sehen wollt. Mir wäre es so wichtig, dass ihr euch ehrlich auch hinschreibt, das wirklich sehen wollt, oder ob ihr sagt, nee. Genau. Aber Drachenmeister genauso, der mag ehrliche Antworten auch lieber als Lügerei, das ist ja, bringt doch nichts. Mir fällt aber eine Sache auf, die Scarab besser gemacht hat. Du hast ja gesehen, dass das Öl da immer noch liegt, obwohl du es abgefackelt hast, ne?
Ja.
In Skyrim ist das Öl weg, nachdem man es abbrennt. Das finde ich ein bisschen cooler.
Ziemlichen Knacks. Genau wie alle anderen Häftlinge, die sie aus den Straflagern befreit haben. Aber sie ist keine Spinnerin. Sie bringt mir so viel Kohle ein, dass Ryan dagegen wie ein kleiner Zeitungsjunge aussehen wird.
Das U-Boot! Nein! Nein! Nein!
Oh, da gab es gerade eine kleine Unterbrechung, also Sprachstörung.
Du schleichst dich hier rein wie ein Attentäter und versuchst dann, dich aus dem Staub zu machen wie ein Dieb. Du bist kein Schnüffler von der CIA. Wer bist du? Weshalb bist du hier? Nun gut, es gibt zwei Möglichkeiten, mit einem Rätsel umzugehen. Man kann das Geheimnis aufdecken oder es beseitigen.
Weil ich muss aber dazu sagen, dass der Jack ja gar nicht in Rapture sein will. Er wollte eigentlich gerade ganz woanders sein, aber das Flugzeug ist dann abgestürzt.
Mach, dass du rauskommst! Ab nach Arcadia! Herrgott nochmal!
Ja, da ist nichts drin, leider. Ja, und das kommen wir im eingesammelt. Auch
Dieser irische Mistkerl hat mir einen Handel angeboten. Ich liefere Ihnen Fontaine ans Messer und ich bin ein freier Mensch, ganz einfach. Woher soll ich wissen, dass dieser Wichser nicht von Fontaine kommt? Woher soll ich wissen, dass sie nicht alle zu Fontaine gehören? Fontaine hat das Adam und jeder will es haben. Ryan hat nur eine große Klappe und einen schicken Anzug. Sogar hier unten sieht jeder Idiot, woher der Wind weht.
Ja, würde ich so unterschreiben, ja.
Ja.
Ja, Ryan ist wirklich ziemlich blind, was gewisse Sachen angeht. Könnte aber auch daran liegen, dass er einfach ziemlich ignorant ist und dumm. Aber das sei jetzt mal dahingestellt.
Ja. So Leute, ich würde dann mal sagen...
Moira! Patrick! Das sieht Ryan ähnlich. Wartet, bis wir fast draußen sind und dann schlägt er zu. Wir finden diesen...
Ich würde mal sagen, wir sehen uns dann beim nächsten Stream. Ich hoffe, der hat euch gefallen. Ja, hast du noch was zu sagen?
Nicht mehr viel. Ich wünsche euch einen wunderschönen Sonntag. Genießt ihn und macht's gut.